Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending the JIRCAS International Symposium 2024. My name is Ayuchi Tamura, and I will be the MC for today's symposium. To begin with, I would like to invite to the stage Mr. Osamu KOYAMA, President of JIRCAS. He will be giving you the opening remarks on behalf of the organizer of the symposium.
Good afternoon. My name is KOYAMA from JIRCAS, Japan International Research Center for Agricultural Sciences. On behalf of the organizer, I would like to say a few words at the opening of this important symposium. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. SAKAIDA Teruya, Director General of the Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries Research Council Secretariat, Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. Also, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to our keynote speakers, Dr. Sarada Krishnan from Crop Trust, and Dr. Hasegawa Toshihiro of the National Agriculture and Food Research Organization, NARO, as well as the speakers for the two sessions for their kind cooperation in the JIRCAS International Symposium 2024. Also like to thank all of the participants who have joined us both in person in this place and online for taking the precious time out of your busy schedule. In July last year, the UN Secretary General said that we are now entering the era of global boiling. And recently, the media has reported that this year, 2024, could almost certainly be the hottest year on record. And the first year that average temperatures rise to 1.5 Celsius above the pre-industrial period. Indeed, we have witnessed extreme weather such as drought and heavy rains affecting human life as well as agricultural productivity. Countries in the global south are facing a protracted food security crisis due to climate change. Also, we recall in Japan, the quality of rice declined last year due to high temperature, heat stress. Amid concerns that climate change will adversely affect crop productivity and grain qualities, the need to develop crops that are resilient to the negative impact of climate change is greater than ever to maintain global food and nutrition security. To this end, it is essential to conserve the diversity of crop genetic resources with resilient traits, such as those exhibiting stress tolerance to droughts, floods, poor environments, pests and diseases, as well as the traits that enable efficient use of water and external input, such as fertilizers. JIRCAS, Japan International Research Center for Agricultural Sciences, has been working diligently in these areas to develop the technologies necessary to produce resilient crops and to strengthen cooperation and sharing of information on genetic resources and technologies to promote the sustainable production of tropical crops and other temporal also crops. So this symposium brings together experts on various genetic resources to consider the diversity and potentials of genetic resources, to utilize diversity. Also, this symposium tried to consider the opportunity and challenges for institutional developments to utilize this diversity in order to build resilient and nutritious food systems in the era of global boiling. That's the title of this symposium. I sincerely hope that this international symposium will serve as a platform for useful information exchange and lively discussions. Please enjoy this event. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koyama. Next, Mr. Teruya SAKAIDA, Director General of the Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries Research Council Secretariat, Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries of Japan, who will give you his welcome greetings. Mr. SAKAIDA, please.
皆様こんにちは。ただいまご紹介いただきました農林水産省農林水産技術会議事務局のSAKAIDAでございます。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。本日はJIRCAS国際シンポジウム2024が無事に開催されますことを心からお喜びを申し上げます。さて世界では気候変動などの影響により食料需要の増加、食料生産供給の不安定化がますます顕著になりつつあります。今年の夏は先ほど理事長からも話がありましたように観測史上最も高い平均気温を記録するなど日本各地で高温による農作物の生育不良あるいは病害虫の発生など農業現場に大きな影響を及ぼしているところであります。また海外でも異常気象の発生により大きな被害がもたらされております。このように我が国を含め世界的な課題である気候変動に対応した強靭で持続可能な農業生産を実現し食料安全保障確保を進めていくことは非常に重要な課題となってございます。このような中日本におきましては2021年5月に決定いたしました緑の食料システム戦略に基づきまして2050年を目標とした KPI を掲げ調達、生産、流通、消費のフードチェーン全体で生産力向上と環境負荷低減、これを両立する取り組みを進めているところです。また本年5月には食料農業農村基本法を四半世紀ぶりに改正し食料安全保障の強化、さらには環境と調和の取れた食料システムの確立を新たな柱に位置づけ さまざまな政策を展開することとしております。本日のシンポジウムでは、強靭な食料システムの構築に向けて、遺伝資源の多様性保全と活用、国際的な連携強化について、当分野で大変活躍されておられる先生方をお招きしての講演、並びに議論が行われる予定と伺っているところでございます。強靭で持続可能な農業生産の実現に向けて、さまざまな視点から議論を深められる機会となることを期待しております。最後になりますが、本日のこのシンポジウムが実り大きいものとなりますこと、またご参加の皆様のご健勝とさらなるご活躍を心から記念いたしまして、私からの挨拶とさせていただきます。本日は誠におめでとうございます。
Thank you very much, Mr. SAKAIDA. Now, please give us a moment to prepare for the next program. Now, we would like to move on to today's keynote speeches. Dr. Sarada Krishnan, Director of Programs, Global Crop Diversity Trust, will give you the first keynote speech. Dr. Krishnan, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is such an honor to be here today and provide this keynote address. And I want to thank Mr. KOYAMA and Mr. SAKAIDA for their opening remarks. And also thank you to JIRCAS for inviting me to provide this keynote today. And I want to also provide a special thank you to Dr. Masa Iwanaga, who I know he couldn't be here today, as well as Dr. Miyuki Iyama for making all my travel arrangements and for her hospitality. So thank you. So today, I'm going to talk about the role of crop diversity in achieving food and nutrition security and provide some historical perspectives, and then moving forward, what might the future hold? How do we move in the future to achieve food system transformation? So our food systems are facing many challenges. Chief among them are climate change, the impact of which is being experienced globally, such as increased incidence of drought, flooding, and landslides caused by flooding, etc. And also the loss of biodiversity, which includes agrobiodiversity as well. Population growth. This will require more intense production of food to feed a growing population without increasing the land footprint. And deforestation, either for expanding agricultural land or for harvesting for timber, which also leads to loss of biodiversity. Increased incidence of pests and diseases, which is also exacerbated by climate change. And then unsustainable agricultural practices such as chemical use and wastage of precious resources such as water. And then food loss and waste is also a huge challenge, which results in loss of income and wastage of precious resources, both human and financial. So all these challenges are interconnected. To transform our food system, we need to tackle each of these. Under climate change, by 2050, we anticipate significant loss of yield globally. And these are especially significant in the global south, where you can see the dark red areas of the map that are where the 50% loss of yield predicted. The green areas in the northern hemisphere tend to become more conducive for agriculture as temperatures rise in these temperate regions. This slide shows the predicted loss under climate change for 3 of our major crops, maize, wheat, and rice. Under the no mitigation scenario, losses of up to 28% is predicted for maize, and even under best case scenario, there could be a loss of up to 9%. And the same for wheat and rice also, significant losses from 22% to 7% with wheat and about 11 to 3% in rice. So to deal with these global challenges, we need crop diversity, and we need to tap into this crop diversity. Crop diversity is crucial for a resilient food supply. Crop diversity will help us with more climate-resilient crops, more resource-efficient crops such as water-efficient or fertilizer efficiency, less perishable crops, higher-yielding crops, more diverse cultivation, and more nutritious crops. Due to domestication over time, we have lost many adaptive traits that may confer climate resilience or resistance to pests and diseases. Using crop diversity will be key to more and better food with less environmental impact. So diversity can come in different forms. It can be, the diversity can be in the form of different crop species. There are about 30,000 species that are used for food, of which only 6,000 we are consuming now, and of that, only the three major crops contribute about 60% of our food intake. And also diversity can be within individual crop species. So as in this example, you can see the diversity in just maize, the diversity in color, shape, size, as well as in the taste. But we are losing this diversity. Just in the US, over 90% of vegetable varieties have been lost since 1903. When new and improved varieties are developed, farmers stop growing traditional land races and varieties, and over time, they are lost from our food systems. Another example is apple in Europe. Of the more than 1,000 varieties that used to be grown in Europe, only 6 varieties are the source of apples grown commercially today. There are many more examples of genetic erosion reported for other crops. I'll now briefly delve into the history of crop diversity conservation. The most important and historical person in seed conservation is Nikolai Vavilov from Russia. He conducted numerous collecting trips around the world. Vavilov assembled samples of many populations or varieties of the same crop with different traits drawn from the various populations spread around the world. The Institute of Plant Industry in Russia was established in 1921, and Vavilov was the head of this institute from 1924 to 1936, which had and still has the world's largest collection of plant seeds. During the early 1930s, he was exiled due to political campaign against him. The institute's gene bank survived the 28-month siege of Leningrad in World War II, where several botanists starved to death rather than eat the collected seeds. Today, the collection holds about 380,000 samples representing 2,500 plant species. Vavilov's work on biogeography of crop plants provided a theoretical basis of the relationship between a crop's center of origin and the amount of genetic variation displayed between its populations. The greatest amount of crop variation was to be found within centers of origin. Vavilov was the foremost plant geographer of his time and took part in over 100 collecting missions in 64 countries. In addition to his tireless work within Russia, at the Institute and also with other organizations. So the resulting samples were assembled into collection of germplasm at the All-Union Institute of Applied Botany and New Crops in St. Petersburg, which is now called the N.I. Vavilov All-Russian Scientific Institute of Plant Industry. Another person of import in crop diversity conservation is Otto Frankl. Otto Frankl really invented the concepts of genetic conservation of plants useful to man and was central to the efforts to organize genetic conservation from the 1960s onwards. He is credited with bringing together the International Biological Program and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in the common cause of halting genetic erosion and conserving genetic resources. He advocated to establish a network of regional genetic resource centers under the aegis of the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, which we know as CGIAR now, and the subsequent formation of the International Board of Plant Genetic Resources, IBPGR, which later became IPGRI, and then now it's Biodiversity International under SIAT. So this slide provides some of the important milestones in the conservation of crop diversity. So in 1971, the CGIAR was established. And then 74, the IBPGR was established by CGIAR with the FAO being the administrative host. From 75 to 95, collection of over 200,000 samples of land races, crop wild relatives, and other materials were conducted in 136 countries. And 91 to 93, the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, negotiations start, and in 1993, it enters into force. In 1994, interest agreement of CGIAR gene banks with FAO. And then 2001 was the adoption of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. And then the International Treaty goes into force in 2004. And it develops that multilateral system of access and benefit sharing and identifies Annex 1 crops, the 64 major crops and forages, which are all conserved in the CG centers. And in 2004, Crop Trust was established. The organization that I work for, the Global Crop Diversity Trust, was established by the FAO and CGIAR to provide stable funding for ex-situ conservation. And then in 2010 and 2014, the Nagoya Protocol was adopted and it entered into force in 2014. So all these rules and regulations have significant impact on crop diversity, conservation, and use. So, so conservation can be done in two ways: in situ in the natural habitats of the species, and ex situ, it's outside of the natural habitat of the species, such as in gene banks. So the focus of the Crop Trust, our work is only on the ex situ conservation. So I will now discuss the role of gene banks in conserving crop diversity. So what is a gene bank? So gene banks are repositories where genetic material are conserved safely and are available for use. Gene banks, they can come in different forms, and most of us, we know of seed gene banks, but some of the crops that cannot be conserved as seeds are maintained in field gene banks, which is very highly resource intensive. And then also in vitro gene banks, and also as cryo banks. So the main operations of gene banks include conservation through long-term storage, safety duplication, regeneration, and characterization, so that way it is useful for breeders and other users to understand what is contained, what are the traits contained in these genetic material, and information management, making sure that the information, people have access to information about these collections. Disease testing, we need to ensure that the material is clean when they are transported between countries. And finally, distribution. So globally, at the end of 2020, we have 5.7 million accessions of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture conserved in 831 gene banks in 114 countries and 17 international and regional research centers. So safeguarding crop diversity gets a prominent place in many international policy agendas, such as the UN SDGs, the Paris Agreement at the UNFCCC COP21, and the Convention on Biological Diversity through its Nagoya Protocol. And under UN SDG Target 2.5, Target 2.5 is specifically about conserving crop diversity in gene banks. And there is also the indicator 2.5.1, which tracks progress made into assembling plant and animal genetic resources in long-term facilities. So the Crop Trust, we work very closely with the International Treaty of Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. We are an essential funding instrument of the treaty, and we work very closely with them on all of these different activities, funding with the other Article 15 collections, policy and training, policy advising and support, emergency. We have an emergency reserve for gene banks, global information systems, and global conservation strategies. And a global system of ex situ conservation includes collaboration and synergies between community, national, regional, and international gene banks, with the ultimate security being done at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. So the Svalbard Global Seed Vault opened in February of 2008. And to date, more than 1.2 million seed samples have been deposited here from over 80 countries. And usually deposits happen 3 times a year in February, June, and October. And this last October, last month, there was a deposit of about 30,000 new seed samples from 21 countries. So the Svalbard is just a safety duplication. So nothing is retrieved from there and used unless there is an emergency that we need to retrieve it. So far I've discussed a little bit about the history of conserving crop diversity and the importance of conservation. So now I will discuss about what future actions are needed for food systems transformation. So recently there have been a lot of interest and push to promote nutritious and underutilized crops, also known as opportunity crops. And an example is an initiative that has been led by the US Department of State called the VAX initiative, which is the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, which has been led by Dr. Carey Fowler, one of the 2024 World Food Prize laureates. And he was also one of our, he was our first executive director of the Crop Trust. So almost in every category of crops, such as cereals, pulses, tubers, etc., we have those that are well researched and those that have some research and development. Those that have been least researched and developed fall under the category of opportunity crops. Many of these crops are highly nutritious and offer resilience to climate change. In order to transform our food systems, we need collective actions that, first of all, embrace opportunity crops. And so the opportunity crops, because of poor research and promotion of it, it has not been adopted and mainstreamed globally. And in this, farmers need to be the agents of change and partners of innovation. So we are one of the implementing partners of VAX, along with FAO, IFAD, and the CGIA are one of the 4. And to mainstream opportunity crops, the way we work is through these 4 mutually reinforcing pillars. First, we need to secure the crop diversity. And we need to conduct research and breeding, including we need to involve partners and do participatory evaluation. We need to develop value chains and seed systems. And finally, we also need policy support. So to secure crop diversity, we really need to understand what are the gaps in collections and expand collecting and conservation efforts, enhancing availability of opportunity crops. The conserved diversity should be characterized for important traits related to climate change resilience and nutrition, making them attractive for use by breeders, researchers, and farmers. We should look at developing also public-private partnerships. To promote adoption of opportunity crops, we need to understand what are the socioeconomic obstacles that prevent farmers and consumers from adopting opportunity crops. And then we need to tackle those obstacles. To ensure easy adoption by farmers, we need to develop seed systems and provide extension services to farmers, because these are new crops, and so we need to ensure that the farmers are given the right tools for successful adoption and financial, ensuring economic impact of growing these. And here also, especially in seed systems and market development, we would need involvement of the private sector. And to promote adoption of opportunity crops, we need to finally, we need to develop enabling policies and regulations to support diverse food systems by working with national governments and international policy frameworks, such as the Plant Treaty and the Convention on Biological Diversity. We also need to raise awareness among broad stakeholders. So many of these opportunity crops are not under Annex 1. So there are many access and benefit sharing issues with related to opportunity crops. And so without policy support, we won't be able to tackle those. And this graphic shows the diverse components of a value chain from seed systems to production, processing, marketing, and consumption, and the various activities that need to be addressed to ensure successful adoption of opportunity crops. So in conclusion, to achieve food system transformation, we need to shift from intensive production of staple crops to embracing much wider diversity of crops that are nutritious and climate resilient. We need to involve a wide range of actors, such as national governments, multilateral institutions, civil society organizations, the private sector, donors, and others with farmers in the center as agents of change. Because if we don't involve farmers, we won't get their buy-in to cultivate new crops. And gene banks can be in the forefront of this challenge, acting as engine and catalyst. And the Crop Trust, we are an important partner to advance these ideas together with a wide range of actors. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krishnan. Our next keynote speaker is Dr. Toshihiro Hasegawa, Executive Scientist, Institute for Agro-Environmental Sciences, National Agriculture and Food Research Organization.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank organizers and also Dr. KOYAMA and Dr. SAKAIDA for giving me the opportunity to speak to you about this important topic, genetic resources. Okay, let me start my first slide. Today, what I'm going to give a talk to is climate change. And already Sarada-san introduced some of the key figures, but I would like to follow some of it from the IPCC Working Group 2 report, and that convey some of the key messages around the climate change and the food system transformation, including genetic resources. So the topic today starts from observe the impacts of climate change, and followed by the project impacts and associated risks. And adaptation action is ongoing, but I would like to introduce some of it, and particularly related to the genetic resources. But I also like to note on the maladaptation. Adaptation is the key, but also there's ample evidence that shows some of the adaptation can be maladaptive. And I would like to conclude from those talks. And the IPCC Working Group 2 report talks about the adaptive impacts and adaptation on vulnerability and the climate change. And the different sectors and different region chapters are there. I worked as a coordinating lead author of food chapter, chapter number 5, that deals with food, fiber, and other ecosystem sub-products. And that deals with lots of plant materials, and some of it from animals. But I think I would like to talk mostly about the crops today. And this handles, this was written by a number of authors, including 3 coordinating lead authors, 10 lead authors, and 72 contributing authors. And we received many review comments from the public, and they were all appreciated, all the efforts to make this the report very successful. And to start with, we first look at the observed impacts. And this is the 6th cycle of assessment report, and we have to report what's new for the past 7-8 years, from 2014 to 2012. And compared with the previous 5 reports, we've seen in the sixth cycle, we see more robust and widespread evidence of observed impacts, particularly around climate-related hazards, as Sarada-san introduced very well. And in all food production systems, from say, on the right-hand side, we have crops and livestock, and here the fisheries and aquaculture. All different systems increase. We see a lot of increase in food shocks over the past 50, 60 years. As a result, these increasing extreme events have exposed millions of people to acute food insecurity. Acute food insecurity is somewhat a contrast to the chronic food insecurity, where the largest impacts are observed in many locations and communications in Africa, Asia, Central South America, and small islands in the Arctic. So those are disproportionately affected by these extreme events. We also observed, research found long-term change over the past 50 years. And climate change, we have shown evidence climate change has already slowed the agricultural growth globally with regionally different impacts. So this is also impacts from the human-induced climate change. And that's the first, in the sixth assessment report, we could successfully show that this is actually ongoing. And impacts are different among different groups, vulnerable groups such as women, children, low-income household, indigenous or other minority groups. And small-scale producers are often at higher risks of malnutrition, livelihood loss, and rising cost and competition over resources. So this makes really climate change issues very complicated. And all right, let me go briefly about the observed change in the different regions for different crops. On your left-hand top, the maize and soybean and rice and wheat. These are the areas that the climate change had already had negative impacts in the past, 1981 to 2010. The more red means more negative impacts, and some of the green spots are positive impacts. So we've already seen some of the negative impacts more prevalent in maize and wheat and soybean, relatively less in rice, but a majority of the crops receive really negative impacts, particularly in the low and the mid-latitude countries. Global South, you could say, are the more highly impacted already by the ongoing climate change. The reasons for the losses vary from place to place on crops, and this is one of the examples on the yield losses by factors. And we know that some of the abiotic stresses are already prevalent, including aridity and heat, and also the biotic stress caused by pests, and that's widespread. And on top of this, we have air quality issue about photochemical extent like ozone that has a really strong impacts. And these impacts are different, but I think some of the places have really multiple stresses already hindering the growth of agricultural productivity. Looking at the future crops, this is already some of the results have already shown by Sarada-san, but this is the results of many simulation studies collected. We've collected about 202 studies published in recent years about maize, rice, soybean, wheat. And on your left-hand axis, the yield changes from 2001 to 2010. On your x-axis is the global warming level from the pre-industrial levels. So we're targeting to try to curb this global warming up to 1.5 degree, but above that, we see many reduction in crop yields in many of the species. In particular, we see a huge losses projected in maize, in some cases wheat and rice. Soybean, we have still a large uncertainty about the impact of projected change, but still mostly negative impacts. And if you look at these panel a little more closely, the darker color is the place currently very warm. Current global annual temperature higher than 20 degrees is marked as really dark. So the tropical countries on the lower latitude countries are marked as red. And whereas the lightest color is currently relatively cool, annual temperature less than 10 degrees. So that's received some of the increasing effects as a result of 1.5 degree warming. But beyond that, we see a lot of decreases in many species. So the impacts are different depending on the regions associated with the current temperature levels. And even small degrees of warming might cause highly negative impacts in currently warm regions marked as T over 20, such as the tropics. So the impacts are very disproportionate. And these are the crop yield losses, but that could in turn affect many different things. Increasing heat and droughts, of course, are the major drivers of the yield losses, but also they not just only affect the crop yields, but also work capacity and human outside work capacity. That can reduce the productivity as well. And this in turn raises some of the crop prices that makes food less accessible from particularly the poor people. And it started with the local effects, but it can spread globally. So these risks, we found that really compounding, some cases cascading, that makes things very, very difficult to handle. So we did the risks assessment along with the increase in temperature for different systems, different risk systems. On your x-axis, this is called burning amber diagram that shows higher, darker the color, the risks are more severe. And here on your y-axis, that is the global warming level from the pre-industrial level. And 0 is the pre-industrial time. Currently, but it was a little bit older, 2011 to 2020, with a 1.1 degree warming at the time of this assessment. And we looked at the different systems. For instance, in the left-hand side, is a unique threatened systems like mountains or coral reef, and where the biodiversity hotspots are. And we see already a very red color. I have to explain one more thing. And the left thinner bar is about the previous cycle, AR5, fifth assessment report. And here's the current assessment of number 6. So this shows a clear contrast of the changes, risk transition from here to there. So this unique system are under at very high risks. And here we have extreme weather events on your left second bar. It's already have a really dark color. And food and water and health are largely up here, particularly of the distribution of impacts. And distribution of impacts are spread from the one place to the other. Particularly on the food and water, at around 2 degrees from above, the changes color very rapidly. So we have this set that 2 degrees is the warning sign, particularly for the food security issue. And what we learned from this exercise is that risk transitions are predicted to occur at a lower level compared to the previous assessment. And this doesn't mean things have changed dramatically, but we know more from the literature that a risk is really closer than we expected from the past. And adaptation action, that's very needed. And also we learned that adaptation option is already ongoing in many places. And we studied many literature papers around these effective options. And of course, the first one is the cultivar improvements, as utilizing genetic resources. This is the first option, and many studies emphasized. And also some of the options that that makes the system a little bit more diverse, including agroforestry, and farm and landscape diversification, and community-based adaptation, and also lastly, and it's very importantly, strengthening biodiversity. These are considered effective options at this stage, and with wider benefits of creating a core benefits in food security and nutrition and health and well-being. And that could enhance the livelihood of producers and also of the people. But if you look at a little bit further, we studied how much they can contribute to reduce the negative impacts of climate change. And so these are from the simulation studies. Some adaptational effects can be quantified, how effective they are. So this is the systematic literature review showing what kind of adaptation options have been quantified in the past. So it's starting from assessment report number 1 to 4, and this is assessment report number 5, and this is the current assessment, and also did some additional research on post-AR6 era. And as you can see here, most of the cases up to AR6, we see mostly the 4 adaptation options have been heavily studied. That includes cultivar, irrigation, and planting date, fertilizer. These are the options, particularly the crop models can easily handle. And cultivars, in this case, are often studied very intensively, but this is only primarily to adjust or to optimize the phenology for changing climate. So many other traits have not been well addressed yet. So that's something there's a room to study further about this negative impact, to reduce the negative impacts. But we saw some other things here in post-AR6 that includes agroforestry, organic farming, climate-smart agriculture, and cropping system diversification. So these studies are now emerging. Oh, that's a good sign. But that also needs to include some of this germplasm and cultivar improvement in addition to these other technologies. So how effective they are is written here. We try to quantify the adaptation potential by defining the difference in simulated crop yield impacts with and without adaptation. So if you have adaptation, how much yield can be raised under certain circumstances. And for the upland crops and adaptation potential, a percentage per degree warming was approximately 4 to 5%. So the 2-degree increase results can, if you can see the 10% decrease of yield can be mitigated by this much. So it's not completely offsetting the negative impacts. But importantly, this is the adaptation of potential on your y-axis, and this is the current average temperature on your x-axis. So this side is more warmer places like a tropical, and this is the lower places. So adaptation potential can be greater in relatively cool areas, but it's not quite in the warm regions. So that also shows that very severe conditions in the warmer regions and the global south. And so the current autonomous or incremental adaptation strategy has a limitation. And here we show research gaps in quantitative evaluations. And here's the regional differences in studies conducted for the quantitative crop model simulations. As you can see here, Asia is dominantly studied, followed by Africa and Europe and North America. And very little have been studied in Central South America and Australasia. So this, and if you look at the crops, and 4 major crops are studied, but still the soybeans are under-researched. Well, not to mention there's other crops like underutilized crops have very studied little. It's really, really under-researched. And so there's a really high need to fill the gaps about these quantitative researches in terms of climate change impacts and adaptation for the future. And also research gaps exist in traits that have been simulated. It's naturally the yield has been the most widely accepted variable of the target, not other very much. So the water use is the second, and quality, including like nutritious quality, is very much under-researched. And so these are the areas where we need to have more close attention. And this is another systematic review that provides evidence of synergy of adaptation with the SDGs. And there are some, sorry, this is very small, and there are some adaptation options that showed different aspects of SDGs. Of course, SDG 2 is the most favorite one. SDGs 1, reducing poverty, SDGs 2, zero hunger, and SDG 12, and the food loss and waste and stuff. And these have been studied for some of the options, including sustainable intensification, nature-based adaptation, social, economic, institutional adaptation. Here, agricultural diversification, agroforestry, these have some effects on these different SDGs, but I just try to focus on here, that's cultivar species improvement. And so far, the relevance to other SDGs is quite limited. And although I believe that has tremendous relevance to many different SDGs, but still the studies-wise, still not well done yet. So this is something area we need to have a closer look at. And maladaptation. We have seen lots of adaptation going on, but at the same time, more evidence of adaptation limits and maladaptation. So I said the 2 degrees is one criteria that we see some of the negative impacts, but also see some of the limits to the adaptation. So the adaptation can be done, but I think it's not sufficient to reduce the negative impacts. That's for sure, that there's barriers. Maladaptation, adaptation that results in unintended consequences. The most disadvantaged groups are generally most affected. Some examples of maladaptation includes large-scale or groundwater-dependent irrigation projects or programs, and they can reduce the long-term availability and increase salinity and water costs. And that's not beneficial to all the farm scale of all the farmers. And access to this technology is somewhat limited, also not long-lasting. And other maladaptation example is migration. This can increase the workload of those left behind in the production site, and that's often women. And there are also financial constraints. That's the debate is going on in COP29, and hope and fruitful outcomes will come out. But there's still a very strong financial constraints exist to implement the adaptation. Also, reduce the loss and damages. And here I would like to show one example from the potential pathways leading to maladaptations in food systems. This is a study done by Rachel Besnakan and others that shows one example case study showing this maladaptation. Anything can lead to adaptive strategy, but some cases that can lead to maladaptive strategies. In some cases, like external non-climate drivers are always exist, like reduced crop prices, low market access. That limits your options to do the agricultural adaptation. Government program subsidies, and these are good in some cases, reducing the financial burdens, but some cases that create some pervasive incentive where farmers focus on specific crops that promote, or they put heavy reliance on external inputs that leads to the diversification of their own systems. And so in eroded agricultural livelihood, that depletes the work labor force in their own farmland, and that can lead to also the loss of diversification. So the changing crop varieties are also a very important option. But if you change the crops, that's elite crops only, that reduces the diversity of their own field. So finally, these are really potentially the loss of the soil capacity to absorb retained moisture. Cultivation of sensitive crops can be a result in some cases, and reliance on imported and purchased food, and that reduces the resilience. So it can, depending on the situation, and the adaptation can be maladaptive. But this maladaptation may be avoided if actions are designed or co-created by the multiple stakeholders, considering multiple dimensions. So these are the similar conclusion from Sarada-san, that this multiple stakeholders involvement is very, very important in designing and implementing adaptation. So let me conclude this talk with these 4 bullets. And unfortunately, we've seen climate change driven by human activity poses a significant threat to sustainable and resilient food systems. Genetic improvements are a key adaptation strategy, there's no question, but their effectiveness still must be tested and the varying levels of hazard exposure. We know the very useful crops, but in reality, producing these effective crops are nice, but testing real world is another important task for the research community. Adapting the improving cultivars can lead to more adaptive outcomes if equity issues such as access to resources are not adequately addressed. And so the one elite crops grown in some specific area but not accessible to many of those smallholders, and that's another key concern. So this has to be solved by multi-stakeholders involvement. And these adaptation options are important, but there are apparently limits to adaptation. And further delays And climate action will reduce the opportunity to implement effective measures to build resilient food systems. So, adapting food systems is immensely important, but at the same time, curbing or reducing the global warming is as important as adaptation. So these two have to go side by side and collaboratively into our to see the better food systems in the future. With that, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hasegawa. Please wait for a moment as we set the stage for the next program.